Gestalt language processing, AAC, ethics. We are getting into it in a future course here at ABA Speech. Did you know that at www.abaspeech.org, I list all of our upcoming CEU courses? Every single month, I do a live course, either myself or a speaker. And the next coming months for our back to school, I said it, back to school time, we're going to be talking about the ethics of collaboration around the ideas of Gestalt language processing, AAC, verbal imitation. In September, we're going to be talking about naturalistic interventions. We have so many wonderful things in store. Now, these CEUs, you can register for the webinars completely free, and that is going to be a link in the show notes. So make sure that you register. If you want to purchase a general certificate, that's $5. Members of the ABA Speech Connection membership, are you in the membership yet? If not, join us. There's over 300 professionals and parents in the membership. You get your CEUs completely free as part of your membership. But if you're like, hey, Rose, I'm not ready for the membership, that is okay too, because every single month you have the option to just pay for your single CEU. These are ASHA approved and ACE approved courses for BCBAs, professionals, and anybody who wants to attend. So make sure that you check the notes in the show notes that is going to have the link that will take you to register for our upcoming live events around the ideas of ethics, collaboration, Gestalt language processing, AAC, naturalistic interventions, and so much more. I cannot wait to see you on a future live course. We have a special guest for you today. This is a special episode 200. I love to celebrate these milestone episodes with a guest that I like to bring back, a colleague who's a friend to have on the show to celebrate 200 episodes. If you've been here with me since the beginning, thank you. This show started with me taping it in my walk-in closet, and we moved up in the world, and we're not doing that anymore. So we have changed a lot on the show, and we actually have some changes coming up with the podcast that I'll talk about a little bit here. My special guest today, very fitting as I tape this today, this is my 16th wedding anniversary with my husband, Patrick Griffin, and we actually taped episode 200 of the Autism Outreach podcast today, and you will get a little peek into my personal life with this celebration episode where we talk all about a variety of things that I know that you will love and enjoy. Without further ado, let's get into this episode.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the podcast. This is episode 200. I can't even believe it. We made it to episode 200, and I have a very special guest. When I was thinking about what should I do to celebrate episode 200, I thought, let's bring somebody from my personal life that you've never met before. So I invited my husband, and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. This is very exciting, very proud of you for, I think you said episode 200. Is that correct?
That is right. Episode 200. And we're actually taping this on our actual anniversary. 16 years. We've been married 16 years.
16 amazing years.
16 amazing years. And I am in one spot of the house and he's in another. You can see, if you really know my content, that is a different view of my home office, because usually I'm sitting right in front of that ring light and you can see the harp in a different way. So thanks for coming on to the show. I wanted to do something to celebrate. We've done milestone episodes for episode 50 and episode 100, 150, and now 200. I feel like every 50 episodes, we have to celebrate. And I remember the first episode I ever recorded was when the kids had a snow day. And that's when I used to tape it in my, closet.
Probably would have been super loud.
Yeah, in my closet. So
You probably
yeah.
had to redo it a couple times.
Yeah, no, I don't know. So thanks for coming on to the show. And we thought we would just have a fun episode where maybe you ask me a couple questions and we just celebrate this milestone episode.
Yeah, definitely. And my questions will be very tough, by the way. So
Okay.
I
Okay,
hope you're
great.
kind of like a rapid fire. So hopefully you're
Yes.
ready.
Okay, I'm ready.
So,
Let's go.
okay. So you started your business how many years ago, roughly? ABA Speech.
So about 7 years ago.
7 years
7 years.
ago. And you started with two physical products. You started with Action Builder cards, and then you started with Double Up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then that was just the start of your business. Then you branched out to whole different things
Mm-hmm.
that you've got into. But one of the big things that you've really honed in on is your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you tell us about the journey that you went from your two physical products all the way to having a podcast?
That's a good question. He has not actually, I have not seen any of these questions. That's a good one. So yeah, I had the idea for the action builder cards. That's why I started my business. And then I was a guest on a lot of podcasts. So I was a guest on, at the time, almost every single speech therapy podcast that existed. And I thought to myself, I really want to learn how to just have my own podcast. I think I remember telling you that we went to Portland, Maine on a really cool trip. And I remember thinking, I'm just going to take a course and I'm going to learn how to put together a podcast. So I took Pat Flynn's course, Power Up Podcasting, and it was super detail oriented, told you how to do everything. And I knew from the beginning I needed to have a podcast manager. So thank you to David and Abigail, my podcast team that have put together every single episode that we've ever done of the show. And I felt like I really wanted to focus on autism and communication. And so we came out with our episodes. The first time you launch a podcast, they say you need to come out with 3 episodes. I need to look back too. I can't remember if they're all 3 solo shows, but I asked a lot of close colleagues and SLPs and BCBAs to be on some of those first episodes. And yeah, I taped them in my walk-in closet. Probably the first whole season was there.
Nice,
So
nice.
yeah, that's
And
kind of how I got the idea.
I know obviously being around you every single day, you talk about being a unicorn.
Yeah,
And I know that's basically you always say that someone that's an SLP and a BCBA. So
right.
for your podcast, who is ultimately your target audience that you've been trying to reach out to? Is it those folks, parents? Talk about who your target audience is when when you're creating this podcast.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think anybody that's focused on autism and communication. So that's what's kind of neat about our business is that we do serve both speech therapists and BCBAs and some parents because, I have this membership now, the ABA Speech Connection. And so it allows speech therapists and BCBAs to get their CEUs, but then we also have a parent portal where Lisa Hausworth, who's been on the show, does a tutorial every single month and adds information. So it's anybody who really wants to help autistic learners strengthen their communication skills or find a way to communicate. And so on the show too, we've had autistic adults on and families who have an autistic child. And so I think really just anybody who has a focus on communication.
Gotcha.
And you do know that, yeah, we call ourselves unicorns. That's
Yes,
good.
I know. I hear that every day.
Listening when I talk.
Yep, I do. So for my work, I'm in sales, so I do a lot of driving. So
Hmm.
I do listen to podcasts, and whenever I listen to them, I'm trying to take away 2 or 3 key bullet points that maybe I can use in my job, family. I
Hmm.
coach our kids, athletics, stuff like that. Do you try and do the same thing? Do you try and for each episode, hopefully someone can your audience can take away a few bullet points that they can utilize in the field?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, absolutely. Every time we do a show, most of our shows are really action oriented. So, we just did one all about visual scene displays in AAC. And so it gives you an idea of like, what is this thing we're talking about? How could I use this in therapy? And there's absolutely action items. The shows that we probably do that are more telling somebody's lived experience or story. So if I have I was just thinking about why I stopped taping in the closet because I had Billy Mayfair on the podcast, and he's a professional golfer. And I thought, I can't. And I was dealing with his publicist, and I felt like I can't be taping my podcast in a closet with somebody who has a publicist. So
Yeah,
that's why
probably a
we
good
moved
idea.
it. Yeah, probably a good idea. Nice guy, awesome guy. If you don't really know, I'm obsessed with golf, and autism and golf. Those are my interests. And so then we moved the podcast out here. But when we tell more of a story like that, so telling Billy Mayfair was on the professional tour for golf, and he was diagnosed as autistic much later in life. And so sometimes when we're doing episodes like that, where somebody's sharing their lived experience, it's more of a like, this is how we can help people who are autistic or support them, or this is this person's story. And I think it just reminds us of our why, like why we became a therapist. So yeah, good question. I love that one.
Thank you for that. I got many more for you. Don't worry.
Okay, great.
So obviously you've done a lot of podcasts now, episode 200. So that's a lot of podcasts. And just me thinking if I had to do a podcast, I would almost think about I'd run out of people to invite on. So is most of your stuff done by you going out and finding someone to be on your podcast, or are there people that are reaching out to you as well that want to be on your podcast? How does that whole thing work?
That's a great question. And I really, for the most part, I would say that 90% of our guests are people that I'm hand picking and reaching out to be on the show. So I might come across a journal article and reach out to a PhD who has written that article because I think that it would be impactful for my audience to hear about. And sometimes, well, a lot of the times when you're a treating clinician, it's hard for you to stay in touch with journal articles in the literature. So that might work that way. Or I might see somebody on social media. I've had some guests that I've met through TikTok who have 1 million followers and are autistic, and they might come on the show and share their experience with social media. But I do have a percentage, like I mentioned with Billy Mayfair, I reached out to his publicist. I have somebody else who, some people will write a book and, or they will be in the limelight in some way and they want to get their message across. And so I do have people, usually they have somebody working for them on their behalf, and they'll reach out to me and say like, hey, I'd love this person to be on the show. But I would say 90% of the people that are on the show are because they came across my desk in some form on LinkedIn or at a conference. I've been going to more
Oh yeah,
conferences. We've had that
that's
talk.
all you ever do.
11 last year in 2024. And so that way I'm always feeling energized. I know people will say like, don't you run out of things to say or talk about? But when you're actively going to conferences or you're on LinkedIn, you're looking at the literature, I don't run out of things to say or people to have on yet.
Trust me, I know you never have things. You always have something to say. I know
Yes.
that. You never run out of things. I know
Right.
that. Okay, so you have your podcast. Tell us about other doors that have opened up for you since you've started this podcast. What else has this allowed you to branch out to, or like I said, expand into?
Yeah, I think what's really nice about the podcast is it allows me to meet people. And I think that's been really fun. So I've had people on the podcast who then maybe I go to a conference like this just happened. Dr. Jonathan Fernan came on the podcast last year, and I just saw him on LinkedIn, and then I invited him on the podcast. We really hit it off. And then he was down at FABA, which is where I was in Miami for that conference. And so I was able to meet him in real life, which was cool. And he also came on and did a CEU for us that is in our ABA Speech Connection membership about restrictive and repetitive behavior. So it's kind of nice, or I'll have people from my membership on the show. And then maybe when I go to ASHA in Seattle soon, there are people that are in the membership that I've had on the podcast. Then I get to see them in real life at a conference. So that's been fun. And, I think it just allows people to know that we're sharing good information every single week. And, I just actually finished up a speaking engagement right before we started this show. So I do like to do trainings and things like that. So I think it definitely opens those doors and keeps, our message top of mind for people.
Okay. So obviously, so since you've started with doing the podcast, like you talked talked about how you started in the closet and working and doing a few podcasts in there, then you moved to
Right.
different places.
Yeah.
What's some of the things that you look back on and thinking like, man, I can't believe I used to do this, and because you've come so far away, what are some things that
Oh,
some reflection that you've maybe even gained from early days of doing the podcast?
yeah. I mean, I think that sometimes I was probably, nervous that we would print all the questions ahead of time, and I would put press record on the top of my sheets for people, for presenters. But people that come on the show, I would say 9 out of 10 times I send over, not for this episode because this is just kind of a fun episode, but I send over drafted questions for people. I still get nervous about that if it's somebody that's coming on that I've been reading their journal articles for like 10 years or 20 years. I still feel nervous about that. Or if it's somebody who's kind of a celebrity or something like that. But our framework hasn't really changed all too much. Our location has. Like I started in our closet, a couple episodes I think I filmed in the home office where you're at now. And now I'm actually in my master bedroom, which you can't see. But this place has been so, but our framework has really kind of stayed exactly the same. We are going to be changing some things with the podcast, like the name of the podcast. We're, toying with changing the name of it. So after 200 episodes, I mean, that's almost 4 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. After 4 years, you kind of want to mix it up just a touch, so nothing too crazy. But our framework has really genuinely stayed pretty much the same, and maybe that's probably why I have a good team, and we've been able to get an episode out every single week for the past 200 episodes.
There you go.
Yeah.
I do have a couple more questions for you.
Okay. Okay.
Who's been your most memorable guest and why?
Ooh, this is a good one. I've had so many great guests. I love that about having guests on the podcast. It's a very cool experience to connect with people this way. But this is another person I just met in person down in Miami. His name is Dr. Merrill Winston, and he's very, very smart. And at FABA, he did a talk about being an expert witness, like in cases and things like that. And he's a PhD. And he came on my show. He's real funny. And I think he used the F word. He said a bad word, and it
Yeah.
was the only episode. I had to like ask my podcast manager, like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Can we bleep that word out? Because believe it or not, I say curse words when I'm not taping the podcast. And he's just like really much a character. And like anybody who listens to this, who knows Merrill Winston, it was really an honor to, when I presented down at FABA. He attended my talk, and it was just cool to have his support, and so many others in the audience when I was down in Miami, because I went to that conference by myself. It was scary at first. Ended up being amazing. I met some friends and hung out with them the whole time I was there. It was super, super fun. So that was probably my most memorable, because he's just a character, and every BCBA listening knows what I mean. He's just awesome.
Nice. Now, on the flip side, who's the worst one you ever had? Just kidding. I'm not doing that.
No, but
I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm
There has
kidding.
never
I'm
been a
kidding.
bad one. There's never been a bad one. Right. I
So,
handpick the guests. That's how,
yes, there
you
you
get
go.
across that. Yeah.
Yep. So let me ask you, I know you love your reality TV and stuff like that,
Right.
but if you could have one celebrity come onto your podcast, maybe they're on the spectrum, maybe they're not, maybe just
Yeah.
anybody, who would be your one celebrity you'd like to have on your podcast?
That's a good question. So, for those of that really follow my content, you know that Jacqueline Larita has an autistic son. She was on Bravo, the Housewives of
New
Jersey, I
Jersey.
think.
New
Yeah,
Jersey.
and so we did do a collab where I sent her the action builder cards and Double Up, and she got an affiliate link and she shared it on her Instagram. That was a moment for me. That was very, very cool. And I do talk to her on Instagram DMs every once in a while, but she hasn't come on the show. Another person I think about, you know, is JWoww from Jersey Shore, because she has an autistic son, and he's doing really great. And she's done a lot of speaking for different autism organizations. So every probably 3 months, I sent her an Instagram DM, but she has not responded yet. So if anybody knows her, because she actually did, I know her son worked with a duly certified SLP BCBA at one time when he was initially diagnosed. So I feel like somebody in the world needs to connect me with her, because I've never missed an episode of her. So yeah.
Nice.
of Jersey Shore, as you know.
I know that.
Family Vacation. Now it's
yes.
called Family Vacation in case you really want to catch it, but it's my favorite.
Yeah, unfortunately, our youngest son likes to watch it with his mom. Gosh. Um, so with that being said, where do you envision this podcast going the next couple of years? Where do you want to where do you want to take it? And what do you like you said, maybe you might change the name. What are some other things you may are thinking about doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about, kind of thinking about changing the name to the ABA Speech Podcast. And, there's reasons for that. Sometimes I think I want to cover topics like selective mutism or apraxia that are not exactly 100% autism, but they would still be really beneficial for speech therapists and BCBAs and parents to hear about. Or just having I ran into somebody at FABA who I'd love to have on the show, and he's a PhD level BCBA, and he has a son who's had speech therapy, but he's not autistic. And so I thought it'd be really cool to have him on the show and just to tell his story of how helpful speech therapy is, and for a BCBA to be sharing that. That's not always the case. SLPs and BCBAs can't always get along. I think you know that from just living with me, hearing me talk about Instagram. Yep. So I think that just kind of broadening it up a bit, not stepping away from autism, but including, shows about ADHD or executive functioning or dyslexia, things that I know would be helpful for practitioners to learn about, but they may not exactly be 100% focused on autism. So I think that's something that we're going to open up. But I really love the podcast. I was always getting in trouble in grade school for turning sideways, talking to my neighbor. And that was always reflected in my citizenship scores. So it kind of allows me to have this connection with people. And, I love doing shows where we have a guest. So I think continued shows where I have guests, where I come across a journal article, meet somebody at a conference, and I'm like, wow, I got to have this person on. So I think just keep on keeping on with maybe a little bit broader of a focus, and potentially a name change might liven it up a bit. So
are there any other platforms you may be thinking about adding your stuff to?
That's a good question. Well, we add for this podcast, we share it on YouTube and all the different areas. Right now I'm growing my Instagram. So I've gone from 25,000 to 70,000 followers because I took an Instagram course and have a guru I've been following. So that's been really fun to make those. I know you haven't been in any TikToks, but you see me filming the videos in our office all the time. So I feel like once I hit a certain milestone on Instagram, I'd really love to focus, continue to post on Instagram. Obviously, I love Instagram. It's my favorite social media platform, but probably focus a little bit more on YouTube and trying to grow over on YouTube. I think a little silver placard here. I think you get that when you reach 100,000 followers on YouTube. That's kind of like my secret dream. Are
you going to put that right behind you?
Yeah, maybe. And maybe something here that says ABA speech. This is kind of drab here. So, oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Yeah, congratulations. Yes, that's awesome. 200 episodes and hopefully another 200 more to go. Very proud of you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on the show. See you in a couple minutes.
Bye, audience.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.